I'm on the.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Sean Dugar. I have the honor and privilege of having recently been elected to represent you, California, on the Democratic National Committee. And as the first African American man elected in over 20 years to that position, I want to say how thankful I am to each and every one of you for being here today and celebrating Black lives and standing in support of the protests and the actions that are happening all across this country and all across the world as we speak. Um, so I want to talk briefly about this moment and why we're here today. I believe it's important when we talk about Black lives and the countless number of people who have been killed by law enforcement in our country and in our state, that we say their names, that we say George Floyd, that we say Freddie Gray, that we say Dominique White, that we say Terrence Crutchner, that we say Betty Jones, that we say Quintino LeGrier, that we say Botham Jean, that we say Eric Garner, that we say Laquan McDonald's, that we say Jamal Floyd, that we say Michael Ramos, that we say Michael Brown, that we say Tamar Rice, and here in California that we say Oscar Grant, and we say Taisha Miller, and we say Stephon Clark, and we say Sean Monterosa, that we acknowledge their names. In our state, since 2012, 681 Black and Brown people have been killed by law enforcement here in California. We're here today to address that. As a nation, there's only been 27 days in the last year where police have not killed individuals. We need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that despite being only 13% of the population, Black folks are 25% of those killed by law enforcement in this country. We need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than anyone else. We need to acknowledge that in California, our police officers are not held accountable for their actions. Since 2013, 99% of officers who have killed someone in the line of duty have not been charged with a crime. We have to address that. Um, and so I am thankful for you all being here today. We have almost 300 of you joining us already. It's powerful, and I am thrilled, saddened that we have to be here for this cause, but thankful for you all joining us today. Um, so as you can see, we have a very wonderful lineup of leaders, Black leaders from across the state that are joining us today. We are going to kick off the program with Congresswoman Barbara Lee, but before we have her come on board, what we're going to do is if you have questions, you can type them in the question box, and we will be answering them throughout the program. In addition to that, we will pick a few questions from that question box that will ask each of the panelists after their remarks. So with that, I would like to bring on someone who really doesn't need an introduction. I feel like at times I've become her official introducer. And so without further ado, I am going to bring on my Congresswoman, the person who speaks for me, as we say in the district, the Honorable Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Let's see. Uh-oh. Amara, I need you to unmute her. Give us just one moment. There we go.
Yes.
Congresswoman Lee.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, Sean, thank you so much uh, for your tremendous work and your service, and really putting us together, because as Democrats, this is what we should be doing in between elections. And I want to just congratulate you on your election to the DNC. And I look forward to working with you as a DNC member to keep up the urgency of this moment. And this moment is for us to seize. Enough is enough. And yes, I want to lift up the family and loved ones of Mr. Floyd and all of the young Black and brown men and women who've been murdered by police in this nation. Now, of course, is the time for mourning. We're grieving, we're angry, but also for hope and for action. I want to thank everyone who is participating on this call, and thank you for your efforts to push our party, our state, and our nation to stand up and to speak up with our united message that Black lives do matter and that enough is enough. I want to also acknowledge my colleague, a great warrior for peace and justice, Congresswoman Waters, who chairs the powerful Financial Services Committee, a member of DNC, and has been fighting all of her life for police reform and for justice, racial justice. Also for Dr. Weber, who chairs the Legislative Black Caucus here in California. I just want to thank you so much for being bold, being visionary, putting forth the reparations bill, putting forth the repeal of the affirmative action, the terrible, terrible racist law that took place, Prop 209, and everyone who's on this call, because all of you get it. And we know that the murder of Mr. Floyd gave a window into all of those who have been killed. As Sean said, names of those who have been killed because of the color of their skin. How many times do we have to stop? How many times will we have to hear, I can't breathe? So we've got to stop this senseless violence. We can't allow any more police misconduct, brutality, or murder. So enough is enough. And the murder of Mr. Floyd and the current COVID-19 crisis, it illustrates again the painful and dangerous legacy that white supremacy has had on our country, and the desperate need to acknowledge and understand how this history of systemic racism continues today. The inequality at the very heart of every crisis and what we're dealing with right now, of course, police brutality and mass incarceration. COVID-19 disproportionately affects communities of color and the cycle of poverty, blocking so many families of color from the American dream. And so this is a matter of survival for countless Americans. So we've got to keep marching, protesting, working, and fighting for a country that is truly free and equal for all of us. And let me just say, I come from the heart and soul of the protest movement, Oakland, California. I was a community worker with the Black Panther Party in the day. The Black Panther Party then stood down the police, protecting our communities from police brutality and killing. And so, again, that goes back to the 60s and the 70s. And here we are again today. So it's so important to keep saying enough is enough. The Congressional Black Caucus is introducing a series of bills on Monday. And let me just briefly go over a couple of them. I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and Karen Bass, who is leading the Black Caucus in a phenomenal way. We have introduced a resolution to condemn police brutality, racial profiling, and the excessive use of force. Also, Congressman Hank Johnson has a reform package which includes the Police Accountability Act, a grand jury reform measure which would require a special prosecutor to investigate cases where law enforcement officers have killed an individual in the line of duty, cooling off period, which is called the Cooling Off Period Elimination Act, which would condition federal grant money on the condition, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee, just know, as this bill moves through the process, I'm going to work to try to put amendments into the appropriations bill for Department of Justice, which conditions federal money on the elimination of cooling off periods for police officers charged for misconduct. And also, as we see this administration doing what dictators do to quell dissent in other countries, we see now the militarization of the police force. And so we are working through the Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act to end the transfer of aggressive military equipment to local law enforcement permitted by the Pentagon's Active Access Property Program, and also I think it's called the 1033 program. But we have many bills around police accountability and transparency, police training and independent review act, the bill to prohibit the use of chokeholds by persons subject to the provisions that prohibit, people who the provisions prohibit would be subject to penalties using chokeholds, and also in the Racial Profiling Act. You know, the last bill that we had on racial profiling, I think at the federal level, was in 1999. So we'll be advocating and advancing these packages of bills. We'll introduce them on Monday, these and more. But I wanted to also conclude by saying what we see and once again understand through this unfortunate window into injustice as a result of Mr. Floyd's death was that underlying all of this, including poverty, including the disproportionate rates of COVID-19, including the disparities in wages and the wealth gap in the Black and brown communities, undergirding all of this is institutional and systemic racism. And so racism is embedded in the entire fabric of this country. And so we have never had, like other countries, 40 countries, a real commission and a real institution to really put forth the true history, the documented history of the Middle Passage, 401 years ago, slavery, and how that plays out today as we see Mr. Floyd's murder on television through video. This is like so cruel and outrageous and sad that, you know, people are shocked by that, but many of my colleagues don't even understand how we got to this point. When we see the disproportionate numbers of African Americans, Latinx and AAPI community members dying from COVID-19, many don't understand the connection and how we got to this point. And so what this commission would do, it's the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission, similar to, in Rwanda, for instance, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but we figured there's nothing to reconcile in America. So it's about transformation. So what we're going to do is document and have a commission where the truth is told about the effects of slavery, institutional racism, and discrimination, including genocide against our Native people, against people of color, and how this history impacts laws and policies today. We have to have some truth-telling in this country, and we have to connect it to today so the public can become aware of the historical context, because many people, we know the school system didn't teach us this history. And so we're going to document this. We're going to have a commission to come forward. That's how you move towards some semblance of unity and healing. But then you have to go for transformation measures. And so we're looking at systemic policy that we have to disrupt, that we have to abandon, that we have to repeal, and put forth policies that are embedded with and infused with our values of justice and liberty for all. And that's how we transform this country. So we have to do this and recognize we don't want to go back to the normal, the injustices of the past. Enough is enough. We're done. We're going to move forward. This is really what I see, the creation and the birthing of a new order, a new country. And we have to transform this at the policy systemic level and at the local level. So I would encourage you to look at all of these measures, look at what's taking place at the state, but use your local activism and your local party to really engage in a lot of what needs to happen at the local level by forcing, local governments to prioritize their funding, their budget priorities, to force us to deal with the educational process around the historical context of injustice as it relates to the Middle Passage and slavery and genocide and all of the human rights violations, and then come up with some, disrupt the old order, come up with some new ways of creating a system of justice, which of course the Progressive Caucus in the Democratic Party, along with our minority caucuses, can lead in between elections. And I think building power this way in our communities, making sure young people understand that we're with them, they're leading, we have to listen to them, because our young people and let them lead the way, because they certainly have made us proud under the very horrible circumstances that the police and that the imposed upon them during their peaceful protests. And they said, no, we're going to do this in spite of the risks, in spite of the danger, that enough is enough. So thank you again, Sean, because these discussions in California have to happen, because as it relates to the African-American community, our population is about 6%. So sometimes these issues get lost. And I think it's incumbent upon our Democratic Party to keep them front and center as we organize and as we get ready for these elections, because we must win in November. And young people need to see us standing up for justice and against what is taking place in this country, and fighting to dismantle systemic racism. Thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. We do have a question for you. We know that part of the power that we have here in California is our checkbook. Are there any organizations that you think are worthy of us making monetary donations to support police reforms and other issues on the Black Lives Matter agenda?
Sure. Now, I don't want to call them out, but I know myself and Congresswoman Waters, Assemblymember Weber, and all on the panel have specific organizations. And there's so many in my district that are wonderful. And there are many that are doing the work of COVID-19 right now, and who are really recognizing that they've got to continue to mobilize around these issues of police brutality. And so I would be happy, Sean, to get in touch with this individual who asked that question, just with regard to Northern California and some of the groups that I work with. But there are many groups and young people. Yesterday I was on a call with Elise Garza and some of our young people in the Bay Area who are helping with organizing young people around the protests and to sustain them so they're not overwhelmed. We're raising money for safe space so that artists and musicians and young people can come together and have discussions and get revived for the long haul. And so we need funding for those kinds of events to really, and those kinds of spaces to help young people be able to take a deep breath and regroup so that they can get back out in the street. So there are a variety of organizations throughout the state that are doing wonderful work. And in my district in Northern Cal, I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee, again, for your work, your support, and joining us this morning.
Thank you. Sean, let me thank all of you. I can stay on another 10 minutes to listen because I'm totally inspired by all of the work that you're doing, and for our party stepping up, and for the Progressive Caucus of the party and everyone who's on this call for really engaging outside of the electoral process. And this is extremely important between now and November, that people understand that Democrats are leading the way to seek transformation of our state and of our country. Thank you again.
Thank you. So next we are going to bring up someone who is a wonderful legislator, who is the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus and really has been making the push and leading the charge on police accountability across the state. She happens to be part of my NAACP family as a former vice president of the San Diego NAACP. I want to welcome and Amar, let's unmute Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber.
Thank you, Sean. Am I on yet?
You're on. Let's get your video up. There we go. Go right ahead.
Well, good morning, and I really appreciate your efforts to try to pull the members of the party together to focus on this extremely important issue. I think all of us are aggrieved over what is happening across this nation in terms of just the what we saw happen in Minneapolis, and that in itself sparked hopefully the consciousness or pricked the consciousness of so many individuals who traditionally have kind of ignored the things that we've said, whether they were Democrat or Republican, have not really done much to take this to heart. And I say to my colleagues regularly that, you know, I have lived through all of these revolts, beginning with the Watts riot, when the National Guards had their location in front of my house on the 45th near Broadway, and saw them with their riot gear and all the things that happened and the shootings and the things that that were present at the time. And so, you know, I've seen this, and the tragic thing is that I've seen how we approach it, and as a result, pretty soon we find ourselves back into the same place we were before, without really any resolution to the matter as we should have. And so, you know, I'm deeply concerned that we don't squander this opportunity to really begin to make some strong systemic change. It is easy for people to get lost and unfocused. And as a result, we end up having struggled so hard, and so many people putting their energy and sometimes their lives on the line, and end up with very little to show for it. So I'm optimistic that that will be the case. You know, I'm kind of, it's kind of hilarious in a way, but in a sad and sick way, that everybody's embracing police reform now. And that's a good thing. I'm not sure how sincere they are about it, because, you know, we just did AB 392 last year, as most of you know, that gives California the strictest laws concerning the use of force. And that was no minor event. I mean, it took the efforts of thousands of you Californians to come to the Capitol, to rally behind me, to make sure that we stayed focused. And it took a tremendous effort to back down law enforcement, opposition to the bill. And at the same time, fortunately for our governor, we had a new governor who was willing to step out and do the things we needed done. But it was a chore. And so when I look at people now and they think that public safety reform is an easy thing, I kind of laugh, because they're getting in on a wave at this point. And I wonder if they had to fight the battles that we fought and the attacks that were on me and all of those who supported the bill. You know, law enforcement, I believe, spent over $1 million fighting AB 392. And now it's always interesting, because many of my members were not going to vote for it, and we just kept pressing. Now that we passed it, California feels very proud. Oh, wow, we were the ones who opened the floodgate. And now I have all kinds of elected officials jumping on, wanting to talk about how we can reform the use of force in our community. And so I appreciate all that, but I hope folks don't get lost and end up doing things that have very little meaning, because public safety reform is hard work. And so it's extremely, extremely important that we stay focused. You know, California has, we've taken the lead in a lot of ways, and I chair the Black Caucus, and I really appreciate my colleagues on the Black Caucus, because when I've introduced issues, they have not wavered in terms of their support. They've been there, they've helped to get votes, they've helped to rally the individuals to focus on these issues that are really important. So most of you know much of the public safety reform that has been done, we've done in California. And oftentimes it's a question of enforcement, it's a question of putting resources behind it, those kinds of things that are really, really important. We you know, we were the ones who recognized the fact of the number of killings that occurred in our community were unacceptable. And most people didn't know California had such a large number of shootings that occurred and deaths for unarmed individuals. And every now and then it would spike like the Stephon Clark or something like that, but really had not decided to do any serious reform. We began very quickly with trying to do body camera policy. And it's interesting now because at one point we had 30 or 40 body camera policies in the Capitol and could not get one of them passed, not one. Law enforcement had pretty much clamped down and convinced the members that if we're going to do body policy, it should be done at the local level rather than having a statewide policy of when you turn the cameras on and what goes with the tape and how much time do you have in order to do that. So that's really, really important. And we never could get that passed. Many members, not the members, but a number of elected officials throughout the state were cautious and had difficulty. We had our AG at the time who did an editorial against all body camera policies. And so we never got a body camera policy. But what we did get, because everybody was so focused on body cameras, we got AB 953 passed, which is the only national, only statewide policy that mandates reporting concerning racial profiling. And when law enforcement woke up and discovered that the bill was on the floor of the Senate, they immediately started attacking that. And thank God for PICO and a number of other grassroots organizations that we fought back. We had to fight the governor because he definitely did not want to sign a body camera policy. And so we were able to mobilize the community. It took the governor almost a month to sign the bill. He finally signed AB 953, which is our racial profiling bill. And that is important because it is beginning to give us data so that people who say, well, we don't do that in our city, we don't have that kind of racial profiling, they're beginning to understand that they do. And so often most incidents that come into play in terms of individuals being hurt and killed, often it begins with an unlawful and unnecessary stop, that the police department decides just to stop people without real cause, nobody's called a crime in, but because it's a certain number of African-American men in a car, they stop that car, and from that, things can escalate, and that's where we end up with folks being charged with, fighting back, or they were difficult to arrest, even though there was no need for an arrest. And so AB 953 shines a light on racial profiling in this state with regards to law enforcement. And we have to push to make sure that those jurisdictions where we have horrible statistics, that their city councils and others begin to deal with the police department and begin to change that policy, because it is oftentimes the beginning of a horrible situation because we have allowed them to stop individuals unnecessarily. And somehow or another, Black folks sometimes just get tired of being stopped. Young men, get tired of being stopped. And it's hard to constantly tell our children, just be quiet, just endure the discrimination, there'll be another day. And that's true. But human nature says every now and then people get tired. So we passed AB 953 a few years ago, and we're beginning to get the data. We have a RIPA committee, a committee made of citizens throughout the state who get this data, who analyzes it and informs us and the jurisdictions as to where the problems are and how they need to correct them. Most of you know, last year we passed AB 392. That is the California Act to Save Lives. And it puts restrictions on law enforcement's use of force and deadly force. And interestingly enough, we did not define it just as a gun, because people wanted us to say, well, what is a deadly force? He said a deadly force is anything that can cause serious bodily injury or death. So the reality is we're doing chokehold now, bills against chokeholds, but technically a chokehold or a carotid restraint, or however they want to call it, is really a deadly force and should never be used, as we pointed out in the bill. It should never be used unless that officer's life is in danger, or unless somebody in the immediate community life is in danger. But we passed AB 953 to really restrict the use of lethal force to only those circumstances where it's clear that the officer his life is in danger, or someone else. Not that he thinks it is, but it actually is. And if not, then his task is to use de-escalation strategies. We also outlaw the fleeing felon law with 392, which means you can't shoot people in the back because you think they've committed a felony. And this was one that came out of slavery, that they felt, if we thought there was a felony, they could shoot you for running away. So unless it's truly a felony, and a felony that endangers or causes the death of an individual, you cannot just go indiscriminately shooting at folks who are running away. And so those are one of the AB 953 was one of those things, 392, excuse me, that we basically did to do that. We've had a number of other things in California. AB 90, some of you remember the gang database list, because that also is targeted toward African-American males. Because if you have any offense and if they put you on the list without you even knowing it, and they never take you off, if you commit a crime, you can get additional time on that crime and not even know you were on a gang list. So they can do it, what they call enhancements, 2 and 3 additional years onto that. So what we've done recently, we have taken in the responsibility for a database and put it into the Attorney General's office, made it difficult for them to add to it. They have to have certain standards to add anybody to that list, and it has to revolve around criminal activity. And we purge the list every 5 years. The list has to be purged every 5 years. And so, because we had people on the list who were scheduled to be purged in 100 years, and we even had babies who were put on the list whose fathers were gang members, and so forth and so on. So as a result, we've been able to curb that. And now we're discovering in LA that they're not putting anybody on a gang list, that most folks now are backing off of the gang list, because that gang list was used against individuals. We discovered that if people applied for jobs, they would send them the gang list. If you want to go in the military, they would send you the gang list. And they didn't have to notify you that you were on the list. So most folks didn't even know they were on the list. And found that only when they did something that all of a sudden they would have these enhancements, these additional things that were added to it and had a devastating effect. So we have been instrumental in AB 90 to getting the gang list pretty much under control, not having it used against people in other things like employment and military interests, and then purging it unless there really is something that needs to happen in terms of the fact that these folks have not committed any kind of offense in 4 to 5 years. Lastly, I just want to mention 1431-21 is a bill by Skinner that gives everyone the opportunity to basically determine or to see the records of law enforcement that have continually to commit crimes and have not shared that information with communities, with others, because we have some who are serial offenders in terms of law enforcement, and we want to make sure. And so AB 1421 is one of those to help us weed out the bad actors. You know, we have a couple of bills in addition to those that we've done on the floor this year, and it's interesting because it was not necessarily related to the incidents that have occurred in the last couple of weeks. It was done early on in terms of the Black Caucus. One, we are in the process of, as some of you know, reversing Proposition 209. I think Congresswoman Barbara Lee talked about it. We're asking, the vote will be on the floor of the Assembly this week. And we are, it is a bill that would go to the voters, the ballot would go to the voters in November to ask, do we want to continue affirmative action Proposition 209? The effort is to repeal it. The 209 has had a devastating effect upon equal opportunity, access to schools and universities, contracting. We've seen the decline in contracting. We've seen the decline even in apprenticeship programs. We were appalled that Sacramento's building a new building across the street from the Capitol for offices for members, and there was not one African-American on that work site, not one. And that is not uncommon. There was a courthouse built in San Diego that was down from the state building, and I would walk down there regularly, and there was not one Black person on that site working. And when I asked the question, they would say, well, we have one iron guy that we can pull in, but he's in LA, which means that the apprenticeship program is not being mandated to include African-American kids into that. And so we're beginning to see the whitening of the construction industry, so that there are these good paying jobs are no longer available to our young men. So Proposition 209 addresses all of those issues for women, for minorities, for veterans, for the disabled, that we've cut out. And as a result, as I said, over the last 24 years since it passed, we've seen tremendous decline in those areas. And as a result, it impacts how many doctors and lawyers we're going to put out in our community, or what professionals are going to exist in California. So we're working to get Prop 209 passed. We've gotten, ACA 5 passed. We've gotten out of the first committee in good condition, 6-1 vote. We've gotten into the Appropriations Committee this week, Wednesday. It got out of Appropriations. So that bill goes to the floor this week for a vote. We have to have 54 votes for the Assembly and 27 for the Senate. We are probably very close to 54, but interestingly enough, who is dragging feet a number of Democrats who don't want to vote for the bill for whatever reason. And we have some tremendous some opposition from a small group of Asians who are very opposed to us doing this bill, even though the data shows that with all of their participation in the universities, that the numbers have not positively been impacted by 209. In fact, they lost percentage as a result of 209, and yet they keep talking about 209 being unfair to them, and yet it has not benefited them at all. They've been sold a bill of goods that's just not correct. So we're working to get Prop 209 passed. We have over 250 organizations that are supporting it. Tremendous effort this weekend to get the final votes that we have. We probably need about, if we could get every Democrat to vote, it would be done. If we could get, we have a few groups who, the Women's Caucus has endorsed it. Of course, the Black Caucus has. The Chicano Caucus is working hard in endorsing it. So we have to basically work to get all of those done in order to make sure that we get this bill passed. So we've got that one. But in addition to that, we also have AB 3121, which is a bill to require California to form a commission that will come back in a year and make recommendations concerning reparations. California did participate in slavery. It was not considered a slave state, but it made money on slavery in insurance policies. It also allowed folks who owned slavery to come to California and keep their slaves. It participated in the fugitive slave law, so it said they went away to California. California would send them back. California has strong statements in its constitution and the issues that took place in the 1800s, and that they believed in, that they were not going to basically liberate those who came to California who were slaves, who run away. That they, in essence, California participated in slavery and benefited from the slave labor that that the slaveholders brought to, in terms of bringing slaves to California to work on a number of projects. So we have AB 3121, that is a reparations bill that has gotten out of both committees quite well, and we hope to have it voted on the floor. It should pass on the floor, and then to be taken to other places. So the caucus is also working on a number of things, of police recruitment and what have you. We'll be coming out with a packet of additional bills that we think is important. We just signed on to the Carotid restraint bill that we've been working on with communities forever. Mr. Gibson is leading that charge for us. Most of us are joint authors on the bill, and it should be, the governor has made his statement in terms of being supportive of the bill. He's also supportive of ACA 5. He's come out recently with that at the last press conference. So we're optimistic that these things that we're working on will matter. We're focusing on a number of issues because we know that, and we firmly believe that while it is a social justice issue in terms of police and police forces, we've also made clear to people in our own press conferences with the caucus that our real challenge is dealing with this country and the racism it has heaped on the country that has impacted the psyche of all of the folks of California. So there's so much so that people can actually sit and watch something like what happened this past week or other incidents that have occurred with no sense of remorse concerning what does it really mean. And having a history of slavery, of lynchings and burnings and discrimination and on and on and on heaped on African Americans. That's what we're focusing on this as a result of this issue, because everybody's coming up with ideas and they want us then to take our interest and focus on, and we're not opposed to focus on immigration, bilingual education. We've had all these things thrown at us and we're saying, those are merely minor byproducts of what happens. That if we solve this issue of racial hatred against African Americans that is ingrained in our system, if we can begin to honestly address that, it then shines a light on all of the other kinds of areas of discrimination that exist. And we want to focus on that because our society is good at focusing on those other issues because they don't have the same psychic and the same sense of responsibility for producing slavery as they have with other issues, so that they can talk about bilingual education, and everybody wants to be bilingual now, and they can do those things, and that's great. But understand that will not deal with the real underlying cause of what we see in this country. It is the tremendous racism against African Americans from the day they're born that has a negative impact, and as a result, it gives a license to others to basically do it. So we are struggling with this, but this is extremely important. The two bills that we have are extremely important because it gets to some of the core issues of this nation. And we also have a bill 1421 that's in the Senate that talks about ethnic studies. And everybody now wants to turn it into diversity studies so we can study Italy and Germany and what have you. The real problem is not Italy and Germany. The real problem is California. The real problem is Mississippi. The real problem is the United States and how they are unwilling to deal with the people of color, particularly African Americans, in this country, and to teach the history that is correct about the abuse of power, not only among police officers, but the abuse of power among vigilantes in this nation. How people can, as they did in Georgia, track somebody down and shoot them just like they used to do back in the South, and mistreat individuals with regards to that. So we have to be honest about what is going on in this nation. And until we are that, we will continue to have these uprisings. Every revolt we've had, people have ignored the real issue that we face. You know, if we're looking at Rodney King, I mean, the issue of how could you just beat a person so hard? But that was one. But number two, how could you exonerate these police officers, put them into a courtroom where they have the opportunity to be exonerated? So these are the kinds of things that we know we have to address, we must address. And if we don't, then what will happen? We will find ourselves once again back into the same cycle. We've had these before. We've missed the boat. We've not honestly dealt with what we needed to deal with. And as a result of that, we then find ourselves dealing with this. And every time, every revolt gets worse, it gets more. This one has never, this one that we see today is the first one that has gone completely across the United States, even into small suburban areas in California, are riddled with protests and people violently looting and taking things away. And then all around the world, when the whole world is impacted by California, by the United States racism against people of color. And as a result, it has a tendency to permeate into these other areas. So we have to be really thoughtful and laser focused on how we're going to change the direction that we need to go with regards to African Americans, because once we do that, the rest of the folks will follow. You know, once you take a charge, and this has been happening time and time again, when we see the progress of African Americans and the issues that we raise that are there, then it will affect everybody else in the nation. So once again, thank you so very much. We have a heavy agenda this coming week at the Capitol with ACA 5 and AB 3121. We hope that we will be able to get the bill, particularly ACA 5, that requires 54 votes, off the floor, and basically begin to really move California forward in a very direct and thoughtful and laser focused way. So once again, thank you so much for inviting me to be on. More than happy to answer questions from anyone that's there. I should be around most of the hearing. I've got some calls, but my computer will be on and I will be available.
Dr. Weber, thank you so much. We do have two quick questions that I'm going to ask you. So there's been a lot of conversation in the chat around training for officers. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're a doctor, you have to go through years of training. If you're a nurse, you have to go through an extended period of training. But police officers get less than 6 months of training before being on the job. What can we do to increase the amount of training and the type of training that officers receive?
Well, we can increase the training in terms of the time that they spend training. We want to make sure, and clearly, every officer has to be trained, completely trained every other year through post. I forgot how many hours they have to do. But the question always becomes the two questions. One, you know, are they getting the information that they need to get? Are we getting the right kind of training? It's almost like teachers who go to staff development training, and if there's no focus on it, they do what they got to do every year, this pro forma, and it may not have any impact whatsoever on their behavior once they leave. So we have to make sure that we're getting the right people to do the training, and that we're having the content and the subject matter with those things, and accountability for the performance of folks after the training. That if you go and you get de-escalation training and you never use de-escalation, you know, you always go from 0 to 10. We got an issue with that because you have to deal with the training that's there. But in addition to training, we also have to deal with recruitment. You know, it is important that we start talking about who are we recruiting to go into law enforcement. And I've had a number of chiefs who have said that the standards that we use, the issues that they have problems with, are those kinds of things that somehow weed out folks who would be good at community policing, who are reflective of the issues in the community that's there. And so we have to be careful of that. You know, we can't constantly go out and recruit folks who've been in Afghanistan, you know, who are on the military, and their mentality is a little bit different than those who have not. We need to begin to recruit folks in the area of social sciences and those kinds of things who have a different kind of reality. We also need to stop, as one guy told me that he's tried to recruit people, one of the standards they ask you is, do you have good credit? Well, most folks don't, black folks don't have good credit. And the ones that they get out of the universities are coming out with debt and other kinds of things. And so he was concerned. He said he was being forced to weed out people who had bad credit. Have they ever smoked a marijuana cigarette? Yeah. So as a result, they're weeded out as well. And so there are a number of things that happen that have a tendency to weed out those who are going to be good. And so we need to make sure we are getting involved. And that's one of the things the caucus is looking at, and we're working with some of the police chiefs. We've got to have a better recruitment system that's there. And we also have to eliminate this code of silence that police officers have, because that has a negative effect on African Americans. Almost every African American I know who goes into law enforcement says their greatest challenge is basically dealing with their colleagues and trying to make sure that they respond appropriately. So yeah, we need more training. We need better training. We need better accountability and evaluation of who's able to use the training. But equally important, we have to make sure we have some folks as in the recruitment end, at the front end of it, because you can train folks to do things, and you can teach them things, and they can pass the test. But if their heart is not right, if they're not focused on the right things, if they don't see themselves as a part of this community, and they're not a part of that community, then that's it. So we're looking at a number of things. I mean, we think the composition of police forces should change in terms of being able to reflect the communities that they serve, and basically work to accomplish that through the various means that we can to support them. So I think all of that is correct. And so getting the right officers, getting the right training, and then doing assessment of the training is extremely important. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Weber, for joining us. There are a number of ideas for legislation that have popped up in the chat box. Okay. If you're okay with it, we're going to compile them and send them over to you in the Legislative Black Caucus, so you all can review them and hopefully push some of them forward. For all the attendees, there are over 300 of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and having this conversation. All of the legislation that Dr. Weber has mentioned and Congresswoman Lee have mentioned, we are going to be pulling together, and the Progressive Caucus will be putting them on their website in addition to posting on Facebook. So you guys get a chance, you all get a chance to look at them and support the bills. We've heard that from Dr. Weber, a priority this next week is ABA 5. I'm fortunate to have my members supporting that, but we will push to make sure that everyone else in our party does the same. So next, we're going to keep it in San Diego and welcome the president of the California Young Democrats, the chair of the San Diego County Democratic Party, and a fellow new member to the DNC, Will Rodriguez Kennedy.
All right. Hey, how you doing? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Video.
We're going to have you come on. Yeah, start your video.
I think you have to do it on your side. There it is. All right, there we go. Hey everybody, my name is Will Rodriguez Kennedy. I am the chair of the San Diego County Democratic Party. Well, he already told you who I am, but it's great to be here today, even though the sort of conditions by which we're here are grave. And, you know, what I'm here to really talk about and sort of speak to is like what we're seeing out in the on the streets, basically. For some of you who know who are here in San Diego, I have been on the streets with the police or not with the police, facing the police, and with people who are protesting rightfully police overuse of force. And what I'm seeing is a bunch of new people who are getting involved from across the state. We're seeing a completely new generation of activists being activated by this. We're seeing an activation in the Black community specifically of people who are otherwise not engaged in our party, who are not engaged in politics, who are sick of seeing. Okay, so apparently they're saying on the comments they can't see me. I don't know why. If I guess we go to speaker view, I don't know. Oh, they can see me now. All right, there we go. Cool. So what we're seeing is a new activation of leaders, and we're seeing it in communities of color, particularly the Black and African American communities. And one of the things that's really important is just how many people are starting to come over to what I think is becoming a new consensus. And that is that the way we've been doing policing in this country is wrong. It's inhumane. It's been long. It's been known for a lot of us have been fighting these types of things for a long time. I actually serve on the Chiefs Advisory Council and have gotten huge fights when, for example, expanding body cam footage, and then also the conditions on which you release body cam footage and all that stuff. But now we're seeing like a new consensus like fill up and even like engaging on the level of tactics and like what police are doing in these protests, for example. Here in San Diego and in the East County, in La Mesa, for example, we have a very severe scenario where the La Mesa the La Mesa Police Department, or someone, because it's hard to tell if it was them or the sheriffs, shot a grandmother in the head with a beanbag round. And the videos from that is just horrific. And what I've been talking about, especially in terms of the context of police tactics, is that the usage of those rounds. First of all, I'm a Marine veteran. I have training in riot control and the use of the deployment of non-lethal weapons or non-lethal weapons, quote unquote. And we're seeing scenarios where police officers are using non-lethal weapons and non-lethal tactics, quote unquote, in a very lethal way. There are videos coming throughout the country where, for example, LA yesterday, where a disabled man was hit in the face with a quote unquote non-lethal round, and you can see the blood like coming from their face. And we're seeing like really like harrowing images of violence coming from the police, and research is coming out today that is showing that the way police are handling protests is actually what escalates into these uprisings, right? We saw that in San Diego where for 4 hours there was a peaceful protest. They shut down the 5. They came back to the Hall of Justice, and what had happened is that the police escalated force by marching troops into a contained space. They created these 3 lines. They shoved the protesters in between them, in between this like very contained space, and then once people are in those contained space, they feel unsafe. Things happen, and they escalated force. And what people are forgetting is that the first step in an escalation of force matrix is typically presence. So in the military, for example, the first thing that you do that in terms of escalating force is your presence, and how you show up to that space is an escalation. So if you show up as an officer without riot shields and you're just like the friendly neighborhood police officer, whatever, that's a different way than if you're showing up in combat armor with a baton and a riot shield. Right. So we're now having like really interesting conversations about the tactics that police are using to handle protests and to handle protests specifically in the context of police overuse of force. So, young people are really engaged in this throughout the state. For example, the California Young Democrats passed called, and one of the things that we're now looking at in terms of diverging from the areas of power and influence around the police complex, basically, is starting to call on legislators moving forward to not take contributions from the police officers, from the various police officer associations. So the California Young Democrats issued a statement calling on the California Democratic Party, on Senate and Assembly Dems, and the elected officials to no longer take the resources or to take money from police officers associations, whether it's correctional, it's police officers, private prisons, all that stuff. If you are, all those organizations we need to start diverging from their influence in our party, because they have held up a system that has clearly led to disproportionate enforcement of the rules and disproportionate outcomes, and they're killing Black people, like, just straight up. So that's the first thing that we're doing, and we need to start, like, actually looking and making sure and paying attention to those sort of circles of influence where we have police unions who are buying their influence or leveraging their power and their resources to either threaten legislators who vote against them, of a vote for police reform, or to, like, influence them in terms of watering down legislation. So that's going to be an important thing, especially as and Dr. Weber has done an amazing job. She's one of San Diego's legislators, so I always like to applaud the amazing work that Dr. Weber has been doing in the state of California. And we need to make sure that we're doing our part to not only support that amazing work, but also to make sure that we pressure other legislators to join her, especially now, because we have momentum in order to pass these legislations, and we have the momentum to push these things. So we don't want to lose that momentum. And you're seeing it in two generations now. As president of the Young Dems, I'm one of the older of that generation. I'm a millennial, and you're seeing it in Gen Z as they're coming in, they're hitting the streets. This is our civil rights movement. And so I want to make sure that people are paying attention, and that they're elevating Black voices, and that they're elevating these stories and these harrowing images that are really shocking the conscience of this country. And we have known that this has been happening for some time, but there are people who are just shocked at how the police are treating people. This has been like the status quo for the Black and brown community. But there are people in the middle of this country who are like, why is this happening? And it's a little bit surprising, but it's good that we're getting to that point. So I think that covers basically the points I was asked to cover. Unless there's some questions, I'm yielding my time.
Will, so we have a question.
Sure.
How do we, as they say older, I like to say seasoned individuals, how can they teach the history of people of color, Black and brown folks, to younger generations? And I'll add in, how can they work in partnership and support younger generations?
Sure. Well, so first of all, in terms of teaching history, we have to also recognize, it's not as bad as in California. I didn't get educated in California. I'm a New Yorker, and then I went to high school in Florida. But there's also like this whole whitewashing of history that's been going on. And it's important for people who are there to sort of communicate the true history. So like one of the things that we're seeing now is, like, because of the uprisings, people are like, oh, well, like there's rioting and stuff like that. And what we're seeing is that there are some people in our community who remember, for example, I'm a member of the LGBT community, you're seeing members of our community being like, oh, well, why are they rioting? And blah, 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 and all this like sort of racially coded language, because rioting, especially applied to the people in these protests, is racist language. Not realizing that almost every civil rights movement has had that type of uprising. Stonewall was a riot, and we celebrated every year with parades in Pride. And when the Reverend Dr. King was out there marching, like they were marching down streets, so people were like, oh, well, why are they shutting down the 5? Well, we forget, like, all those arm in arm pictures that you see from the civil rights movement, and the sort of whitewashed civil rights movement, that was all down major streets, and they were closing down those highways, and there were hundreds of thousands of people protesting. And what they also forget is that after those pictures were taken, the police beat them. And so, like, there is this, like, it's important not only to tell the history, but also to tell the history in context, so that people understand that what we're going through now is not any less noble than the civil rights movement, and because there's a lot of people who like to sort of whitewash things. But in terms of teaching history, I'm seeing a lot of young people who are actually interested in it, who see this as their civil rights movement. And one of the things that sort of like builds clashes between generations is that it's really easy for young people to come into the situation and be like, well, it's been like this for a couple of years or for decades or whatever, so it's your fault that it's been like this, so now step aside. And so it's also incumbent for younger generations to recognize the wisdom of our seniors, and or of our more senior seasoned activists. So in general, what you want to make sure that you do when you're speaking to new activists is not to be condescending, or not to be like, you want to approach it as like, you always want to approach it from like a counsel, not a counseling, but like a place of, what's the word, but a place of caring, and it's, you don't want to like be like, oh, you whippersnapper, we did this in our day and you're doing it all wrong. You want to just make sure that you approach it from a place of like commonality and respect, because it's really easy for young people to just like turn off when you're like lecturing them, if you know what I mean. But especially like considering, like, if you look at the histories, like, it's very affirmative of what we're doing now. So like, if you come from that perspective, like, oh yeah, we've been fighting this for years and we're with you, and this is what happened in our day, the police beat us with sticks, or like, there's that what they're going through now could be very a place of love. Someone said, Felicia said, that's a good point. So that's what I say. Like, when you approach it, just don't approach it as you're trying to teach them something from school. Approach it as like, we're in this shared movement, and this is what happened in my day, and I'm with you now. I'm now moving on. So you just have to like frame it differently if you're trying to like teach people things.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. You are appreciated, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Happy to do it.
So next, again, someone who needs no introduction. Some of us call her Auntie Maxine, but her official title is Congresswoman. We welcome Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Congresswoman, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be invited here to be with everybody today. And let me just thank you for taking time out to expand the discussion on what is going on in this country with all of the protests that we have, protests directed at the police departments of the world and of the country in particular, based on one of the most recent incidents of what took place in Minneapolis. What took place in Minneapolis is a graphic display of the brutality of police officers who disrespect, who are racist, and who are brutal. And this goes on all the time. But for some reason, this display of brutality and murder has gotten the attention of Black, white, Asian, Latino, young people, et cetera, and so these protests have emerged in a way that is causing legislative bodies, heads of sports organizations, heads of the financial institutions, everybody having to stop, take a look, and at least, even if they're not absolutely true and honest, at least relate to it in some way that they say they're going to do something about it, something should be done about it, etc. So we're living at a time in our history where we see the beginning of significant change. And so we've got to take advantage of that. We've got to take advantage of this moment and make sure that we back up the protest and the young people who are on the street and the old people who are on the street. This is intergenerational, really, with the leadership, really, by young people with all of this energy and this courage that they're displaying. So I am absolutely delighted. I'm so pleased to stand with them because this is an issue that I have been involved in for many years. Many of you are too young to know about Chief Daryl Gates, who is the police chief in Los Angeles. He popularized the chokehold in a short period of time, and I forget exactly what those years were. there were 16 men who died as a result of the chokehold administered by LAPD officers. 12 of them were African Americans. It was supported and led by Police Chief Daryl Gates. Not only did Daryl Gates popularize and support and utilize the chokehold, he basically explained it when we confronted and we were advocates for stopping it. He basically said, we've been doing some investigation and we're finding out that Black people, die from the chokehold simply because of abnormal way that they are constructed and that their neck is constructed. And they're not quite like normal people who wouldn't die from this kind of pressure when we're trying to restrain, et cetera. So he was an awful human being. We did get the practice stopped in Los Angeles years ago. And I was working on police abuse at the beginning of my career when a young Black woman was killed on her front porch, witnessed by her two daughters because she could not afford to pay a $22 gas bill. The gas company called the law on her because she would not allow them on her property. The police came out backing up the gas company, and she dared them to come up on her porch. I think she was yielding a butter knife, an inconsequential weapon that could not have really done any harm, but all that she had to try and threaten them to keep them from turning off her gas. They shot her down in cold blood, the LAPD did. And I was so absolutely outraged by that I organized something called the Black Women's Forum. And we addressed and confronted the police commission. We organized, we marched, we called out Daryl Gates. We complained about him to the local city council and to the mayor, and we did all of that. Eventually, like I said, the chokehold was outlawed in Los Angeles, but that's only one city in the state of California. This police abuse has been going on historically because it is born out of something that Dr. Weber alluded to. And she's been doing a fabulous job because in many years past, legislators weren't about to take up this kind of legislation, afraid of not only the police, but the police unions who are organized with a lot of money and who weigh in on public policy and have contributions made to elected officials and yield a lot of power and would have controlled, basically, and protected what happens with public policy related to police officers. And so, let me just say this. I am very, very pleased and inspired by the work led by Dr. Weber because, as I said, elected officials have been intimidated at every level of government, starting with the city councils, the mayors, the state legislatures, and the Congress of the United States of America. And let me just say this, starting with our local governments. City council people hold the budgets of the police department. City council people tend to give them what they want. City council people make sure they have the best benefits to retire with. They have the kind of payment of overtime where they're making more overtime money in the way that they do their job than their actual salaries. They retire with huge benefits and huge pensions. And so the city council people have the power, but they don't have the courage for the most part. They will not go up against police departments. They will not take action against police departments. So that's one level of government that is in direct contact with the possibility of influence over police departments and police chiefs. Most of our cities don't have strong police commissions. There was a time when there was great advocacy for citizens-controlled commissions to oversee what was happening with the police. That whole movement died down because of the power of police unions. And so when we take a look at local government, they're on the front line of being able to control their police departments. When you move to the state level can do a lot in the way that Shirley Weber just described, in collection of data and other kinds of things, but they don't hold the budgets of each of those police departments unless they are appropriating money to give additional money to police departments, as is done in Congress from time to time. And so every level of government does have some type of influence, but elected officials will not take on police departments and the police unions for the most part. And one of the reasons that they don't do it is because they're worried about their reelections. And when the police unions put up a lot of money against them and their opponents, they fear not being able to be reelected. And so that has been a real problem in the whole system, in the way that we talk about, control of our police departments. It is very difficult to do under those circumstances. And the money that goes to elected officials who would try it to support their campaigns does not match the amount of money that's raised by the police unions. So a lot of thought is given to this. But when you have enough elected officials with enough courage, and now absolutely advanced by these kinds of protests and organizing that's being done by young people, this is the time to move because you've got the kind of street heat and you've got the kind of support and understanding coming from, our communities that can get behind the elected officials and give them a lot of support. Oftentimes when there have been any attempts to introduce anything worthwhile, by the time it gets through the legislative process, it is weakened so much you don't even recognize it when it so-called comes out for signatures. Barbara Lee was discussing what is going on in Congress and the package that's being put together, and even at this moment, still being negotiated and will be unveiled on Monday in a press conference. Those bills are tremendously designed for the most part, and you've got a national chokehold bill, part of that bill. You've got use of force in that bill. You've got training in that bill. You've got every aspect of policing that should be paid attention to. And it's going to have to now, traverse the legislative process. Democrats have the majority in the House, and I believe that we can get it out, even though there are going to be some frightened Democrats who will be shaking in their boots, and they'll be telling us they can't get reelected, that they're front line, that they're in a district that is barely Democratic. It may be 1 or 2 percentage points Republican. They can't afford to vote for the bill. I don't know how many of those it will be, but it will be some. I just hope it won't be so many that it can derail the package that finally is put before them. I don't expect a lot of support from the Republicans. There may be some, but for the most part, they shake in their boots, not only because of the President of the United States, who's got complete control over the Republican Party, but because many of them are just stone cold racists. They're not just conservatives. All conservatives are not racist, but we have the predominant number of Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate that I would define as racist, based on not only some of their comments, but their opposition to certain kinds of legislation. And so if we get it out of the House, then it goes to the Senate. When it goes to the Senate, it is in more trouble, because the Senate is not in control. They lack the majority, and the Republicans are difficult, if not impossible, to deal with. You have watched McConnell. You know who he is. You know what he is, and he's not about to let anything pass in the United States Senate that he opposes, because he believes that, we're being unfair. to police officers, that police officers are to be honored. They are our heroes. On and on and on, all of the kind of rhetoric that you hear all the time from right-wingers and conservatives and racists about protecting the police. But the main thing that some of them are concerned about is holding down those who would oppose their racist and conservative policies. The Justice Department, for the most part, whether we're talking about our attorney generals in our states or our district attorneys, are all a part of a justice system that's designed to protect the police. And so it's hard to get through the justice system no matter what way you approach it. First of all, you've got to deal with cops who should not be on the police force, who are racist themselves, and who, come from backgrounds, experiences where this is what they've been taught, this is what they've learned, and they are protected first by their police chiefs and then by their partners. When they commit crimes, oftentimes beating up folks, and the partner is standing there looking at them, as you have seen that happen up in Minneapolis, they are bound by practice. They shall not speak against another police officer. They back each other up no matter how bad they are. You will never, ever get police officers who witness their partners committing a crime, beating, murdering even a citizen of the United States, or a person, citizen or not, of the United States. Never will they testify against them. Never will they report them. And so it's a system of justice where the police are supported all the way throughout the system. We have attorney general. We have district attorney. We have a district attorney in LA, and her name is Lacy Clay. And I want to tell you, I think it's, what is it, Lacy? I said Clay, it's not Clay. It's something, Lacy.
Jackie Lacey.
Yeah. So, Jackie Lacey. So we have a lot of Democrats who said they care about police abuse who are supporting her. A lot of blacks are supporting her because she's black. The woman is no friend to our young people on the streets. As a matter of fact, in one case where the police commission deemed the officers to be at fault, she refused to charge them. I have not supported her. I'm not going to support her. And I know that I will be criticized by Democrats and by African Americans who just support her because she is an African American or she is a Democrat, supposedly, or whatever. But I am not supporting her because she's a part of a justice system that does not protect the people, but rather protect the police. Now, having said that, with the Congress of the United States and the package that's being put together, I know that it is envisioned that we will include a broader definition of civil rights violations, because don't forget, when we don't get justice at the local level and we refer it up to the Department of Justice for civil rights violations, and that decision is made up there between the Attorney General, I suppose, and the FBI and all of that. Look at what we're dealing with. Do you think Barr, our Attorney General, gives a darn about what we're talking about? I don't think so. Do you think Trump, who's talking about calling out vicious dogs on protesters and talking about using the military against protesters in what is a democracy, is a system of justice and leadership that we can win with? No, we've got to get rid of these people. We've got to register and we've got to vote. And we've got to know what we're voting for when we vote for our district attorneys. We've got to know what the qualifications are for police chiefs. We've got to make sure that when they are picked by mayors, that we know what options and what choices they have, and we put up people ourselves to be the police chief. And we've got to get on those city council people who are not doing their job of oversight and responsibility of the police departments. And we've got to make sure that we elect as many Democrats as we can at every level of government, in all of the houses of government. And we've got to make sure that we have a president of the United States who will select an attorney general who is about protecting the people and not about being his own personal lawyer. So all of this is in the system. This is systemic racism. This is the systemic tradition of protecting police officers, and it's not going to be solved simply by saying, well, we can train them to be better. No, you can't. You know, all that you can do is you can hope for getting less people who are racist in the system, and it's got to be transactional. Even if you are racist and you've got some racist thoughts, you will never let them surface because you know that your job is on the line or you can't get hired. And so all I'm saying today is this. Yes, we've got a package of bills in Congress, and yes, it's going to be voted on. I don't know if we're going to be able to get it through, you know, even the House, and then certainly through the Senate. And then I don't even know if we can get it to the president's desk. Well, I know. I just don't feel that he would sign anything unless it's so watered down that you wouldn't recognize it. But I don't want people to be discouraged. I don't want to be discouraged because this is not about tinkering with the system that's going to make it better. It's about taking it over. It's about registering. It's about voting. It's about Democrats, progressive Democrats that are in charge of the systems, that are going to have the kind of people who care about other people. I've been working on this, I guess, since the 90s. And I confronted Daryl Gates. I am on some of the social media outlets now who are going back over my history of the confrontations that I've had, not only with Daryl Gates, but the editorials that I've written, the news outlets that I've been on. And I have paid a lot of attention. Young people are asking, what can you do? I pay a lot of attention to the millennial outlets. I was on Cheddar. I'm with Blavity. I'm with the millennials, talking with them because this is our future. And these are the ones who will basically help to create the change. All we've got to do is give them the significant support that they need. And so whether it's, again, and I won't go over this too much, at the city, state, or national congressional level, yeah, let's make the fight. Let's not be discouraged if we don't get what we want. Our win is going to lie in elections. November emerges as extraordinarily important. We've got to elect a president. We cannot elect, you cannot allow Trump to be elected, no matter if we are being interfered with by the Russians and by Putin, taking over our election systems as they think they can do. We've got to watch out in all of our areas about how the elections are handled. We've got to make sure that there is vote by mail in California. We do have absentee voting. We have permanent absentee voting, and our state is being sued by this administration, trying to stop us from having a ballot mailed to every citizen, whether you request it or not, so that you have options. So whether or not you're voting by mail and absentee voting, or whether you're at the polls, we've got to make sure that these systems work. Right now, many of you don't really know how your county systems work. You don't really know, what they're doing to have the polling places they should have. You don't know whether or not the way that people are elected to serve selected to serve on the boards includes people and young people from our communities who will be there. You don't know a lot about your system and how it works. We've learned a lot about the new systems in the greater Los Angeles area that were adopted. I'm just so sorry that these new systems were voted on by our legislature in a presidential election year, because here in Los Angeles, the Registrar of Voters tried early voting, tried reduction and consolidation of polling places, because early voting was supposed to reduce the amount of people at the polls on election day. It didn't happen here. And people stood in line until 11 and 12 o'clock at night in Los Angeles at the polling places, never heard of early voting, Register hadn't put enough money into the education, the purchasing of radio and television times, the development of ads, and the Democratic Party itself did not put enough time and activity into promoting early voting days in the counties that were in these new systems. And so we've got to pay attention at every level. We have the power, and with these young people, we really do have more opportunity to exercise power than perhaps we've ever had before. They have the courage. And these police who are beating them, who are misusing them, we've got to speak up and stand up for them. And we've got to call the cops out. Now, I know, look, nobody likes violence. And so I'm concerned that when we get on television or on the radio, and we're talking about what's going on, the first thing some of us start out saying is, I believe it is our constitutional right to organize and to protest, but I'm for peaceful protest. I don't want this violence. And for those people who are creating violence, I want them, look, don't get diverted off into that conversation. That's what they want you to do. They want the conversation to be about violence, and they assign it to all of the protesters. Some people will say, well, it's the people coming from out of state. No. As a matter of fact, the Constitution says that you have the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to protest. And it doesn't say anything about peaceful anything in there. It just gives you that right. We don't want any violence, but let's not make that the topic of the conversation. Let us say, no, we want to talk about the killing that just took place. We don't want the emphasis to get off of George Floyd. We want to talk about the knee that was on his neck and keep the conversation on the murder. Keep the conversation on the targeting of Black people and minorities. Keep the conversation on abusive cops, and don't get caught up in trying to prove how peaceful you are. Because that's what they want you to do. Of course you're peaceful. You don't have to say it. You don't have to say it over and over again. You don't have to prove anything. What you have to do is protect these young people. I am going to, and this is not in the package, and some of the things that's not in the package of Congress, I'm going to be introducing a bit later on. We've got to do away with the possibility that the President of the United States can tear gas peaceful demonstrators. We've got to stop that. I'm going to have a bill on that, and I'm hopeful that after November, when we've gotten rid of Trump, that a lot of what we want to do, we will have the possibility of doing it. And God forbid, if we have a Democratic Senate, and we have a Democratic House, and we have a Democratic president, we should be able to move this country. And never again should we have these majorities that we don't get this stuff done. And if we have Democrats who oppose us on these issues, then we should go after the Democrats. So that's tough talk, but I have to tell you, it's tough times. And I've been in it long enough to know that the fight has gone on and on and on with not a lot of results. Now is our moment. Now is our time. Thank you so very much. And thank all of you for participating. Let's strengthen our state party. Let's make sure that the progressives have the opportunity to define our party. We're doing good in California. We are one of the most progressive parties in the country. And let's use that influence. And we should also do it at the DNC level. For our DNC participants on the program today, let's make sure that the DNC is well defined in its efforts to support the policies that are going to get at the atrocities that have been permitted for far too long. Again, I thank you for allowing me these moments to share my passion with you, and I appreciate you all. And I'm on television tonight. I'm on almost every day, and I'm calling it like it is. I call the president a liar every opportunity that I get. I talk about how deplorable he is. I talk about how Barr is nothing but a bootlicker for the president, and I don't miss my word. because one of the things we've done too long is we've been too nice while they're just cleaning our clock. Thank you very much, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Waters, for all of that and everything that you do, and you standing for us and telling it like it is and speaking truth to power. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
You so welcome. Love you all. And then stay in touch, and we're going to keep working. And I hope that our package comes out as strong as all of you would want it. If not, do not give up, okay? We'll keep working. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye now.
Bye. So there have been lots of questions. Yes, this session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on the Progressive Caucus Facebook page. So for those of you who want to see it right away, you can see it there. That's where it'll be hosted or posted. In addition to that, I want to thank the leadership of the CDP Progressive Caucus for standing up and helping to co-host and facilitate this conversation. They're actually compiling the notes and the bills and the actions that have been recommended by our panelists, and we'll be posting those to the CDP Progressive Caucus website as well. So you have a place to go and look at these actions. I also want to thank, we've had some wonderful elected officials join us, including our state controller, Betty Yee. So I want to send a thank you to Controller Yee and all the other leaders who have joined this conversation. Yes, and so now I'm going to hand it over to someone who is one of only 2 Black people in the state of California to lead a county central committee, who is a dynamic leader in her community, and just a dynamic leader in general. I am welcoming Tisa Rodriguez, the chair of the Riverside County Democratic Party.
Thank you so much for having me. This means the world to me because we all need to come together right now in this beautiful outpouring of so much wisdom and so much information and so much action is what's really, really going to get us there, guys. We have to stay on, we have to be intentional, and we have to all find ways to bring something out of this that we can advocate for, that we can do, and that we can take care of, at least one. That's everything I'm doing right now is about that. So while I'm going to talk about a few of the things that, we typically do, we always do, we ask people to go and watch at the polls, watch the vote counting, because we have a big problem there. Some of these other things. I'm going to talk a little bit about more of the secret sauce, things that we have to do at county committees if we're ever going to make these changes, and about a couple of things that it's allowed us to do. I've been chair since November 2018. My background is actually, I was a member of SEIU Local 1000. I learned a lot that way. I come from family who were rooted in both in the movement with the farm workers in the Bay Area and in with the civil rights movement on the East Coast in Virginia. So what that means is that all of my training from my birth tells me that we have to watch how we relate, how we speak to each other, and how we build. And we have to build communities, because when we need to act, we need to be united together in order to be able to act. So I'll tell you a little secret. The very basis of my leadership style with the committee is in social justice and organizing. That's like my basic thing. I'm organizing one massive union slowly with every member that we have, every Democrat we can bring into the coalition, every community member we can bring in, and everybody else, so that we can all gather together on issues that we need to work on, because when things get critical, we have to be able to be together. So I'll just share a few little areas that stay on my mind, and then I'm going to challenge some other committees. If you're not already thinking about these, you really need to be thinking about these. Like every single county, we have systematic challenges and a history that we have to address. We've been one of those counties that's been red, that's had problems. We've had people protesting babies, going to shelters in Murrieta. We have people that are out there right now. We just had the mayor of Temecula have to resign after saying that no good Black or brown people ever got shot. What is that? We have to work on how we talk to each other. One thing is, a far too popular idea in our own house is about Democrats having new young people who, in our blind spots, we mean well, but they tend to be young Black or brown people who really want to get involved and they get excited. So we go, okay, we want to bring them in as assistants. What's the problem with that? Some of you know intrinsically, and some of you go, what's the problem with that? Because we want to make sure that they can come in and they can do some things. When you make someone an assistant, you are assuming that they have the time, energy, and money in order to be able to do that for you and wait for it to be their turn. There is almost nobody out there who has that amount of privilege, you know, unless they're very young. And then I'm telling you, they're on the next thing. So when you have people that want to get involved, want to do things, they have to be built up. We've rejected that thinking. Those people, if they come in and they want to have an idea, take it on. It's their idea. They have to get the credit, and we have to turn the language around so that they are getting the credit for what they do, and so that people can see that there are actually a diversity of people working on every single thing that we are doing, that everyone is a role model for everyone else. When we do that, that lifts us up, and we don't have people thinking as much about their prejudices. And when we start talking about, you know, violence and people dying, we don't have people in our own houses, like I've personally experienced back, you know, talking about, oh, but violent, oh, but angry. No, there's none of that. You're going to have to get over it and work with people. So we have to challenge ourselves to really think about those prejudices. And that's the one thing that we're working on. We don't have assistants. We have people who work together, who get things done, or we have people who don't work. So it has to be all together. Another problem that we've been working on is, and Maxine Waters touched a little bit on this, and I was so happy to hear it, is about things that you don't know that you should be able to do, right? Everyone should be able to have the information at the local level in order to be able to know that they can have the conversations that they need to have and go take advantage of the opportunities. If you have a group of kids that you want to have come together and have a police dialogue, and we have activists in our communities who do that, and you want to be able to have someone help work with you, you have to know that there are people already in your network or associated with you that could work with you on those things. But if no one is telling you that your reach is bigger than your city, your reach is bigger than, you know, than your county, then you don't know, and you can't really do more than that. Also, the biggest problem with that is all of these people who don't know feel like they're being shut out of a club, and they go away. They don't come back, they don't bring their energies, they don't, you know, help work with us, and then you have these coalitions of people competing over the same issues. We all have the same ideas. We need to come together in order to bring it up. Because the truth is, we cannot build up Black and brown leadership if people don't know that they have resources that they need, or they don't feel like they're part of the conversation. We all have to be able to be part of the conversation, so we have to communicate to them proactively, and we have to let them know that they are welcome to be a part of it, like really feel it. We also have to be more equitable in evaluating and supporting our diverse candidates and electeds. We have an incredibly weird system in the state, and our CDP knows it. You know, we look at our processes and we go, oh, okay, you have all these questions, but why is this candidate, why is the Black male city council member getting asked just these kinds of questions and getting grilled versus, you know, the white male city council member in another city getting asked the stock questions and then okay, on to the next thing. We have to go to systems where we ask the same questions and we give them equal consideration. We all have the ability to have the common sense consideration. That is our superpower, to be able to consider talent and be able to develop that talent to make sure that they can rise up and they can lead, right? And so what is all this able to do? We are able to turn to our partners in the community, to all of our community groups, to labor, to have the conversations and say, hey, we are having these conversations, we're growing and we're changing. Now we need to be able to work with you. So I've had since November 2018, a lot of conversations waving. I'm always talking to somebody. I'm always working to build up my understanding, their understanding, to do what we need to do in order to be able to take action faster. And one of the things I'm really, really proud about it, guys, we scheduled a candlelight vigil in 4 days. It was a massive thing. I'm really, really proud that we all came together. We had the NAACP, most of the Black community and leadership groups from around the county. We had Black youth groups, right? We had literally all of the African-American pastors in the county. That does not happen, right? And we had our brothers and sisters at SEIU 721 at the Inland Empire Labor Council, and we came together in 4 days and created a vigil, because you have something different for everybody. You have some people who want to be in the streets with the signs and shouting. There is room for that energy, but there's also room for the energy of people who want to pray together, who want to stand up, and who want to tell their leaders that you're not acceptable. Not doing something in our communities, not taking ownership of what keeps happening in our communities is unacceptable, and have them stand there is also a requirement. So let me just touch on something that did happen between all of these, okay? So there was a protest on June 1st. It was a beautiful turnout. It was organized by some incredible young people. But what happened was this. Exactly that same turning the story. The Riverside County Sheriff, Chad Bianco, came out with his forces and took a knee with those young people. All the cameras around, click, 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 click. Beautiful moment, took a camera. They had arranged a 6 o'clock curfew. As soon as that curfew hit, they started clearing people out. Heavy, heavy force, tear gas, all the stuff. They had these like fire pop things. They were clearing people out. Bam, they gotta go. Finally got everybody out. He turns around immediately and issues a massive, massive request for an increased budget. You see how he took that narrative? These people are so dangerous that we need more money. That's insane. It was a massive number of young people who needed to be heard and needed to have their narrative respected. So one of the accomplishments that I am so happy about is we were so organized between our brothers and sisters in labor and our friends who do this all the time for events, that the sheriff and the mayor of Riverside had to stand there and just nothing on their faces. What were they going to say to us? We arranged everything, organized, everybody did, they were able to get out there and they were able to scream and shout, don't get me wrong. We kept ourselves organized and they did not get to have that narrative. So that massive $150 million increase that they wanted to have, they did not get that narrative that day from us. And these are the kinds of things that we're moving forward in the spirit, because we've built up that goodwill and we've done that internal work to provide more opportunities, more leadership, and to overcome some of the ideas that people have about central committees that are important. We have to keep doing these things. And I want to just say, in a final little note, I had something that just kind of occurred to me, but I feel like it's really important to say, okay? The Black Lives Matter movement was created as a rallying cry against the repeated denial of our rights to be part of the world just like everyone else, living peacefully. What that necessarily means is that whether we take our activism into the streets, the classrooms, the halls of justice, or the Capitol, our chosen of activism matters and must be respected. We must choose to make it count on our terms, and no one needs to co-opt it. If you want to be an ally, yes, thank you. But accept it, listen, and be respected. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tisa. We do have a couple of questions for you. You're in a non-blue county, or a county that is a little bit more purplish. How do you work with those that don't necessarily agree with you on every issue? How do you organize them?
So actually, our numbers are quite good. We are blue, but okay. We are like, we got a little lavender in there. So the problem is we have these parts of the county Southwest County has a lot of problems, and there's a couple of others that we are still working on getting the Republicans out. And actually, the really exciting part is in some of the cities in that area, we've turned the voter registration between the time. We've turned the voter registration, and now we're working on the turnout. Some of the areas like Temecula, Murrieta, Menifee, some of those areas, we just have to keep registering people. We have to keep working with them to get out. But I mean, the truth is, some of these people do not, like the hardcore Republicans, they don't meet with us for a reason, right? Our best energy is in working with and electing all the people that we can, working around them, and then, you know, organizing to get rid of some of these guys. So we spend a lot of energy on looking for people, on finding people. One of my big focuses is on building the bench, because the youth in those communities are not conservative. The registration is increasing on our side. And we need to keep getting the youth in order to help turn that district, and we just gotta keep at it. A lot of it is time, patience, and organizing.
Awesome. You actually touched on the second question I had for you, which is what tools do you use to motivate people to register and to turn out? And how do you have that conversation amongst allies as well?
The biggest problem is really, honestly, some of the allies, because people get really excited to make the phone calls and knock on the doors, but you have a lot of people who, frankly, have moved. We have some of these communities, they're high turnover vacancy communities. And so you go to knock on their door, you're not going to find the person. You go to call the person, you're not going to find the person. So what we've been able to do with a lot of these coordinated campaign stuff is we've been able to make some more inroads. We have a couple of projects that we're working on now in order to work on one big problem we're having with the voter registration is a lot of these kids that were registered through the motor voter second they turn 18. They were registered non-party preference, permanent absentee. They didn't touch anything. They didn't say anything. They don't know what's going on. So what we're doing is we're working on a project to have that conversation with them so that we can say, this is what it means. Do you want to be a Democrat? Especially if the whole family's registered Democrat except them, maybe they want to be a Democrat. Let's have the conversation. And then talk about what voting by mail means, because we're 100% vote by mail this time, and we have to have those conversations because, frankly, even people who are registered vote by mail don't usually know. I do precinct work, and I can tell you from doing that is it's insane the number of people who come in and go, I want to vote, I didn't get a ballot, and you're looking at their ballot and going, this says you did. And I'll tell you a secret, and another problem in our county, it's that our registrar of voters was under federal watch until very recently. So we really have to be very careful when we have to watch them. So our plan in the general, and the plan that a lot of our clubs have done, is to just talk to people. So we're going to ratchet that up. We're going to have some conversations. So anybody who's in the region of the county who is interested in having some good conversations about how to with people about how to get them to vote absentee, make sure they're registered correctly, their addresses are correct. We've got a big effort coming, and we have to do it.
Great. Thank you so much for all that you do, for your work, for being one of only 2 in the entire state, African Americans who chair a county central committee. You are appreciated.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, everyone. And I just love hearing everybody. So I'm just going to keep listening.
Great. Awesome. So before we jump into our final speaker, we have a couple of officers from the state party on the line that I want to acknowledge. Our Vice Chair, Alex Rucker, and our Controller, Dan Weitzman. So thank you for joining us this morning still. So I know we had on the agenda Mayor Michael Tubbs. He is out marching in the streets of Stockton and was not able to join us. It was a last-minute protest. But we do have the only elected African-American officer of our state party, someone who always speaks truth to power, our state vice chair, Daraka Larimore Hall. Daraka, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Awesome.
Can everybody see me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Amar, and the rest of the Progressive Caucus for hosting this. And of course, it's been incredibly inspiring to listen to our congresswomen and our caucus chair, who's really been an outstanding champion for making sure that California is at the forefront of the struggle for Black lives and for police accountability and for social justice. You know, so when Sean asked me to be part of this panel, as a good friend of mine, of course, he asked me to handle the really easy questions. He said, Daraka, can you drill down into what can be done about, or how should we think about police unions and their political power? And what can we do to hold fellow elected officials or fellow Democrats in office or in leadership of the party accountable to the movement for Black lives and to the fight for social justice? So easy stuff that I get to handle this morning. Look, so I think in thinking about the role of police unions, and a number of the speakers have alluded to the fact that they do play an outsized role as an obstacle to reform and to police accountability. There's no denying that. But it should be stipulated, we should all agree, of course, as a progressive organization and as a pro-union organization, that collective bargaining is a right for any employee. We don't have any problem with any group of public employees negotiating over wages and working conditions with their boss. That's a fundamental human right. Now, I think it's great that we're finally having a conversation about what policing is for in our society and asking ourselves if we really need so many cops or cops at all. I think that's a totally appropriate question. But to the extent that we have cops, that there's somebody that goes in and clocks in and gets a badge, they should also have a union. Taking that aside, however, the fact is that there's no group of public employees that I can think of in the United States that somehow get to negotiate contracts that hold them exempt from criminal liability for possible murder. I mean, nobody else gets protections like that. And that's the fault of the law that sets the terms of those negotiations. And as Maxine pointed out so well and so pointedly, right, the people sitting on the other side of that bargaining table from the police are our elected officials, our city councils and county boards of supervisors. And they're the ones that are agreeing to terms of employment that give people impunity and a lack of oversight. That has to stop. And I think that comes from two ways. First and foremost, for us as a party, electing better Democrats who take Black Lives Matter seriously. And I'm going to talk about that in the second half of my remarks. But in terms of the police unions, it has to come from accountability and tough conversations from fellow trade unionists, from other people who represent and organize public employees, that no organization can escape accountability if they're out there putting up barriers to holding people accountable for gunning people down in the street. That's a non-negotiable and a no-brainer, just as much as the right to collectively bargain is. So I'm very excited to see that unions, including unions that have sworn officers as part of their membership, stepping up and calling for accountability, threatening to expel, which I think is completely appropriate, expel police unions from labor federations if they don't change their policy and change their positions on issues of accountability and public safety. So I think we should be part of that. So I think it's completely appropriate for this party and for our clubs and for the labor caucus and trade union activists who are also Democrats to be part of that movement for accountability. Look, racism in the labor movement isn't new. It didn't start with police unions and it didn't start with Donald Trump. There's been a fight within the labor movement against racism in the ranks, against racism in the leadership that goes back a century, all the way to A. Philip Randolph, who confronted the AFL's leadership with their refusal to organize Black workers. So this struggle continues. We should be on the right side of it, but we should be very careful not to kind of fall into lazy rhetoric that could aid people that are out to destroy all public sector unions and don't really give a crap about social justice or protecting people from killer cops. So let's not play into those cynical hands. while we do stand up. But what about these elected officials who at every level have seemingly like made criminal justice and law enforcement some kind of exemption? You know, in our party, we talk a lot about litmus tests or purity tests or whatever. And one thing that I've learned is that the definition of a purity test or a litmus test in our party is like an issue that doesn't affect you personally, right? So it's always somebody else has the litmus test, but your issues are just core values. We hear that a lot from one another. And the fact is that for 20 years, we've said, and quite rightly, that like we're not going to get behind or spend party resources on someone who doesn't respect women's bodily autonomy and support the right to choose. But somehow it's been an exemption for even longer that we can have Democrats who are tough on crime, meaning they support policies that lead to mass incarceration, or they're personally buddies with a shitty DA or a corrupt sheriff. And so they'll lend their personal support to them, even when the party is stepping up to try to replace somebody with a progressive. So that's why we've had these instances where you have huge numbers of Democratic elected officials lining up to support Republicans for DA and for sheriff. And that has to stop. We have to build a political culture in which being for criminal justice reform, holding police officers accountable for their actions, and frankly, replacing policing with other forms of social intervention that are more appropriate for huge swaths of what the police do today. We have to make those things, frankly, litmus tests. They have to be core values. They have to be in our Central Committee questionnaires. They have to be what we ask people who are running for even low-level positions like school boards and even water boards. Because what we see is that this exemption that we give for who we're going to support in law enforcement positions leads to a situation where whether we have a Democratic mayor of a city or a Republican mayor of a city, Black people get gunned down on the street with impunity. And that call to courage and call to stepping up has to be made at every level where we're considering endorsements. And let me name some names to wrap up and talk about some specific fights that have happened in California and why, you know, this issue is a little more complicated than being able to just, you know, use who the police unions support as a kind of proxy or stand-in for who's good on issues. For example, right now we have a battle looming in the Los Angeles area where Reggie Jones-Sawyer, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer, is defending his seat. He's the chair of the Progressive Caucus in the Assembly, an African-American representative who has been a champion for social justice, labor rights, and for criminal justice reform. He's being challenged by another registered Democrat who only has one institutional endorsement, just one organization. Of all the myriad organizations that engage in politics in California, he's got one endorsement, and it's from PORAC, from the statewide police union's umbrella political action group. Because think about that. What's going on in that race that you have an incumbent who's been great on these issues of accountability and a challenger who only has one organization behind them? We know what that's about. They're scared and they don't want progress being made. But the fact is, if you look at Reggie Jones-Sawyer's donation records, he's gotten money from PORAC in the past. Because this has been so normalized, it hasn't even been about policy. It's just been about accepting that this is a big organization that engages in politics and spreads its money around quite widely. So you can find their donations in the histories of both champions for criminal justice reform and some of the worst culprits and worst defenders of impunity for police officers. So so we can't go, I wish we could just go backwards and look at the list of donations and just go after all of those people. It's going to be a little more complicated than that. But we've got to look at people's records and we've got to hold them accountable. So another name I want to mention, and this is where I really wish that it didn't take violence on the streets, you know, protesters getting their heads bashed in, for us to be paying attention to this issue. But the Democratic Party, we've now we're endorsed and are going into a general election defending one of the worst defenders of impunity for police officers, one of the worst records on criminal justice reform in Cooper, who's embraced by the Democratic organizations and party, and looks like he's sailing to re-election. This really underlines something that Sister Maxine said that's so important. This is another African-American elected official whose record on these issues are terrible. So in recentering these issues in our politics as a party, we need to shake up the old lazy ways we decided on candidates, which sometimes was just based on identity. We need to shake up this idea that we just give people a pass on criminal justice because those issues are hard or controversial or whatever. And we need to shake up the notion that when we're endorsing people for local office, issues like criminal justice reform and anti-racism aren't relevant and we should just be talking about potholes. We got to shake up all of those things in order to bring these issues to the center of our politics so that we can be an agent for change and for justice for Black people and for everyone in California. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daraka. We haven't gotten really any specific questions for you. But can you talk a little bit more about the role of police money, and especially when it comes into parties, whether it be a county party or a state party?
Excellent. Yeah, so folks have heard me go drone on about this before, but it's really important when thinking about donations and money, not to think about donations as some kind of like evil magical spell, right? And so that like if you take money from a certain source, then you're taken over by that evil force and tainted by it and so forth, right? The money drives policy, and it's the policy and the politics that we need to be watching. And the fact is, like, unions can make donations all they want behind the scenes. Their real power comes out in the field and out at the ballot box. And the reason that police unions have gotten their agenda through and the bad parts of their agenda through is because the bad parts of their agenda are popular at the ballot box, or they have been historically. A lot of people have alluded to this, that you have mayors and city council members terrified of taking on the police union because they know that they could spend money against them for their reelection and run someone who says that they're pro-police and this other person hates cops and so forth. I mean, there's a reason there's like a fake generic cops mailer that goes out to voters that supposedly is, a pro-police mailer. It's another one of these for-profit sham things, just like the ones that pretend to be Democrats. But the reason for that is because there's voters out there who are like, I want to know what cops think and I want to vote for what cops want. That's our fight. Our fight is out there to voters to offer an alternative that, like, hey, these aren't the policies that are actually making you safer. And having 50% of our city budget go to policing is not making us safer, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's not doing even what it's purporting to do. We have to have the courage to go out and make those arguments to voters. We have to have the courage to insist that our candidates go and make that argument to voters, because it's an absolute absurdity that the average Californian walking around when they're paying their taxes, that a majority of it is going to between policing and incarceration, that's going to these like quasi-military sources instead of to job creation and environmental protection and parks and all of these other things. So that battle needs to be front and center. I think we have a long way to go. It's not for nothing that we weren't able to get this meeting, this forum, as popular as it is, to actually be an official CDP event, which is pretty disappointing. But we've got to stay loud, and we've got to stay insistent that Black lives don't just matter when shit is burning down.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daraka.
Thank you.
For joining us and for your support in this. Again, you are appreciated. So we're about to close out, but there are a few shout outs that I want to give before I introduce the wonderful Jovanka Beckles to close us up. Sorry, give me 1 second. There I am. Hi, everybody. So I want to thank all of the caucuses that have supported this effort. There are so many to name, but I know we have on the call or on the Zoom right now, we have the chair of the Disability Caucus and the chair of the Children's Caucus and the chair of the CDC. And I know there are others that I'm probably skipping, but I want to thank all the caucuses that have really pushed out this event. I think we've had over 300 attendees, another 50 or so on Facebook. Yes, the Seniors Caucus. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning or now afternoon. This has been really important. I think it's been an important conversation for us to have, and I pushed to make sure that it took place this weekend because it's timely. It's not a conversation that we can have in a month. It's not a conversation that we can have down the line. It was really about having it in this moment and making sure that our folks on the ground, our boots on the ground, have some marching orders, know what they're going to do. And so I think we've gotten that today. I also want to thank Jenny Bach, who is the secretary for the state party. She's on the call or on the Zoom. And I want to thank the officers and the leaders within the CDP Progressive Caucus. When I came up with this idea, when I started reaching out to folks just on Monday, it was the Progressive Caucus that stepped up and said, hey, what do you need? We will provide any support that you need. So they've been behind the scenes doing the Zoom and answering questions and posting on Twitter and are going to help with some of the back end work of pulling together all these ideas and suggestions. So with that, I want to turn it over to one of the at-large officers for the CDP Progressive Caucus, a freedom fighter, a fellow freedom fighter, someone who stands up for what's right and just, the Honorable Jovanka Beckles.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be a part of this radical revolutionary caucus, the most of them all, and an honor to just be able to close us out because all of the speakers before were incredible and amazing and shows why, and how we can move forward our revolutionary agenda. Gosh, Darka was on fire. To go after this brother is a little intimidating, I must say, but thank you so much for those words, those courageous words that you just spoke to us, because it brings it all around, from our Congress members to our chairs, to our co-chairs. It's all about racism. Racism is embedded in our laws, which is why I felt like the words that Brother Darka talked about was so powerful, because as he said, these issues of police reform and accountability need to be at the center of elections, because if racism is embedded in our laws, then we have to be able to elect folks who are going to change those laws. And so I so appreciate that so many people now are embracing police reform. I so appreciate that, and I'm proud to be from Richmond, California, where we led the way as much as we were able to at the time to change and bring about the reforms that we could at a municipal level without the support that we needed from the state. That's why I ran at the time for state assembly, because I knew that in order for Richmond to be able to have, and Richmond and other cities throughout California, to have the power and the strength to be able to have strong police accountability policies, we needed that some changes at the state level. So I can truly appreciate the words from Dr. Weber and the work that she's doing in the state of California in working to change laws at the state level. The police unions, we know the police unions have blocked a lot of these reforms that are needed. And so Dr. Weber's the policies that she talked about, AB 953, I'll review AB 92, AB 392, AB 90, Senator Skinner's AB 1421. And these are all state level policies that need to be implemented. But I also want to remind us that the reason why so many officers are able to get away with these bad behaviors, the reason why so many cities in California and all cities in California aren't able to implement strong policies is because of the Police Officers Bill of Rights. And I want to encourage everyone to Google that. What is the Police Officers Bill of Rights? And that's really the bill that really protects those bad behaviors that we're seeing. And I also want to just appreciate Auntie Maxine as well for her words and how the fact that she talked about the need for us to mobilize and really embrace young people. I know former President Obama talked about that as well, needing to mobilize around our young people and support them. But in speaking courage and truth, I also have to remind us that when young people supported, one candidate, Bernie Sanders, overwhelmingly, we as a party didn't support their call for change. So, we have to look at where we fall short, and in terms of our action. So I think that it's so important that if we expect to earn the respect of young people, in the party, outside the party, then we have to listen to them. And we demonstrate the fact that we're listening to them with our actions and not just our words. So, I know she mentioned the fact that she talked about the powers that local politicians and elected officials can have. City council members, that many of them don't have the courage to hold police accountable. And she's absolutely right in that when she said council members won't take on police unions. And I have to remind us as well that, as a council member in Richmond, that, it took a lot of courage for myself and some of my other colleagues on the Richmond City Council to implement policies that challenged and held the police accountable. We changed the name of the police. It used to be the Police Commission, where our residents felt that a commission that's named the Police Commission isn't necessarily about us as residents of Richmond. And so we changed the name from the Police Commission to the Citizens Oversight Commission. As a Richmond City Council, I brought forward policies that enable our residents to be able to bring charges to and complaints against police officers without an automatic tool. Before that, they had to wait, they had 45 days. And if you and your family have been involved in an incident and you're grieving, then it's really difficult to remember, oh, I have 45 days to make a complaint. Well, the policy that we implemented in Richmond states that, if someone went to the hospital as a result of interactions with police, it was an automatic investigation. And so, but that's all we could do. And so I know that having electoral policies that hold police accountable is what we have to do, and it's what will enable us to have trust. In Richmond, I so appreciate Darika's comments around the police unions and their right to to organize, their right to collectively bargain, and at the same time, it should not be so much so that there's power in how they influence electoral policies. So as we close, I'd like to remind us not just see these times as hopeless, as sad, as negative, There's so much going on right now where we see our young people in the streets demanding change. And I want us to see these times as an opportunity for radical change. I think it's a time for cleansing. It's a time for purging out what doesn't work, what hasn't worked in centuries, particularly for Black people, as it pertains to systemic racism and oppression. So this is my call to thank all of you who were involved in creating this space for us, the leadership. Thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists who came and brought the fire. We are the Progressive Caucus of California. And as I said earlier, we are the most radical and revolutionary platform. Check us out online. You can see some of the many resolutions and policies that we created. We have resolutions around cities and counties refusing contracts with ICE. And I actually had it up, and now my iPad just froze on me. But I do encourage you to go to www.progressivecaucuscdp.org and look for yourselves the amazing policies and resolutions and platform that we have as a caucus. And I want to invite you to join the caucus in order to stay informed. And I want to encourage you also to stay tuned for our next steps. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you once again, Sean, for moderating this. This was incredibly enlightening. And I believe that as a caucus, we don't stop at just talking, right, and just words, but we are a caucus of action, and I encourage you all to join us.
Thanks, everyone.
But have a good day. Stay safe. Sean, you did a good job, brother.
Yeah, great job, Sean. Great job, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Amar, I think you have to click end.